Alpine Touch has been a staple of Montana for nearly 8 decades. Folks around the Treasure State have been putting Alpine Touch's world-famous all-purpose seasoning on their steaks and burgers for longer than most of us have been alive. The holidays are coming up. If you want to knock everyone's socks off, be sure to pick up some Alpine Touch Cold Smoke Rub for the best flavor for your Thanksgiving turkey or your Christmas prime rib. Alpine Touch comes in the mail right to your door. Just visit alpinetouch.com. Alpine Touch, Montana's special spice.
All right, welcome in FCS tackle football fans to another episode of the FCS Football Talk podcast. We are getting ready for the FCS National Championship game, and Zach and I previewed the game earlier this week. I had Mike McPhilly on earlier this week as well for the NDSU side of things, and now for the Montana State side of things, we bring back to the show Colter Nuanez of Skyline Sports and ESPN Montana. Always fun for me to be doing the questions and Colter to be doing the answers. And so, Colter, how are you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Of course, man. Thanks so much for having me. And I was thinking the other day, when I was watching the Vikings. I know you're a Minnesota guy. Vikings in the mix for the number one seed. Who would ever saw that coming? But we decided that you are Sam Herder, Sam Darnold. You guys are like doppelgangers. So if I call you Darnold instead of Herder during this, that's why I've been just you could be the Vikings quarterback in a different life.
I like it. I've actually heard. So my brother is 4 years older than me, but he gets mixed around, and I get mixed around him, being me and all that. But I've heard a lot of people say that he looks like Sam Darnold.
There you go.
It all adds up now. So we'll take it. Montana State's been rolling this year, obviously, and now making it back to the national championship. So just overall, what are the vibes like in Bozeman and the States in general?
Well, it's been really interesting to watch how this has all played out because as very many listeners of this understand, Montana State is one of the fiercest rivalries in all of the FCS and honestly in college football. And there's a lot of vitriol, there's a lot of hate behind all of it. But the one thing that Montanans in general seem to rally behind is fellow Montanans, especially when they get to perform on the biggest stage. And so while there's definitely some Grizz people that are having some consternation about all this, there's also a whole bunch of people that I think have been like, well, if there's going to be a team that wins it, might as well be a team from Montana and might as well be a team from the Big Sky Conference and might as well be a squad that's led by a whole bunch of guys from the state of Montana. And that's what probably the defining factor of this Montana State team. Not only have they been so excellent, but you go through their top 10 or 12 players, the vast majority of those guys are from Montana. I mean, Tommy Malott, Brody Grebe, Marcus Ware, Rylan Ort, McCade O'Reilly, Adam Jones, all these guys are from the state. And I think people around the state have taken a lot of pride in that. And it's been a pretty cool story to watch. There's also just the element of there's sort of some redemption here, right? Montana State's been sort of knocking on the door, but they haven't been able to get over the top. And it's been the exact same two teams standing in the way, North Dakota State and South Dakota State. And now here they are with these guys that have had all these different battles and trials, and they get one last shot at NDSU on the biggest stage. So I think it's pretty cool that we've gotten to this point for both these programs. I know NDSU went through a lot of adversity too. And so to have sort of another matchup and a rematch of sorts in the championship game is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, and just following this Montana State squad from afar, there's just like every year there's at least one, maybe two teams that you just, in a sense, kind of get a feeling about. And this year it has been Montana State, where, I mean, NDSU has obviously been very good this year. Same thing with South Dakota State, but at different points in this year, there's always been something where it's like, I don't know whether it's NDSU's defense or South Dakota State's offense, but Montana State has just been rolling all year long, and you're in the thick of it. So what's it been like following this team this year? Like I said, you're in it. You're close to the program. From the outside, it just seems like they are laser focused, business like attitude, like just completely on a mission is the vibes I get. So what's it been like from your perspective, just knowing this squad and covering it this year?
Well, the sort of the commonplace mentality amongst just Bobcats in general. I'm talking about alumni of the school, faithful of the football program, former players, etc. Montana State has been good for a very long time. They certainly had some tough times in the 90s, into the early 2000s. but Mike Kramer won 3 Big Sky titles at Montana State. Rob Ash won 3 Big Sky titles at Montana State. Jeff Choate actually never won a title at Montana State, but certainly helped elevate the program. And now Brent Vigen's got a couple Big Sky titles under his belt. They've been in the national playoffs. This is, I think, my 15th year covering them. They've been in the national playoffs, I think, 9 or 10 times during that span. They've been to the Final Four, 4 of the last 5 years. All that is to say that there's always been sort of this lingering, wow, we really think this is great, but do we actually belong? Are we quite good enough? Like, are we good enough to say that we are the team in the state, first and foremost, over the Grizzlies? And secondly, that are we good enough to actually hang and compete with these Dakota states that have been dominating the FCS? That entire attitude, that entire mentality seems to be completely eliminated by this team. I don't know how they were able to do it, but I do think their ability to do that has been the thing that really put them over the top. There has been no wondering or no like happy to be here or no like, man, I think we have a chance, but do we? These guys absolutely believe they have a chance. They've been on a quest since the day that they lost North Dakota State last year to get back to this exact moment. And I think that's why you've seen them be such a complete team, such a steady team. And I'm glad that the focus comes across to people that are watching it from afar because that's certainly been, I think, a key factor to their success this season.
Yeah, and a quote I like, and I know you've said it a lot on your show and podcasts and other podcasts as well. I think it was McKade O'Reilly that said it. Like, there's no more lessons for them to learn. Like, they've learned all those lessons, whether it was, the 2021 and 2022 losses to NDSU and South Dakota State to see, okay, Montana State made it that far, yet there was still a bit of a gap there. And then, 2023 last year, just with how things ended for Montana State. Do you think how that season ended with some of those losses to Idaho, Montana, then the block PAT against NDSU, that was like the last little bit of gasoline that needed to be poured on on the match to make Montana State like always been good, but like a legit not only national title contender, but now a national title favorite.
No doubt. I think that the two biggest factors I believe in building, I think there's actually three primary factors when it comes to building elite FCS football programs. And that is number one, this is every level of football, stability. And if you have sort of unrest and stability, still having continuity within the scope of the culture of what you want it to be, even if you have head coaching changes. That's what North Dakota State has done so well, is they've kept the main thing, even with now, 4 different head coaches during this unbelievable run. Secondly, I think you have to understand profoundly your strengths and your advantages and also your weaknesses, your disadvantages as a football program. Every FCS school has disadvantages. Some have bigger advantages than others, but every school has disadvantages. When you come to the Montana schools and the Dakota schools, winter is certainly among the leading candidates, for things you have to mitigate. And then I think the third thing is you have to have self-awareness. You have to be able to realize what has gone wrong if something does go wrong, and you have to address it. That has been the key factor for Montana State. They've had institutional stability for the better part of 20 years. That's helped them get to this point. They've also done a great job of emphasizing their advantages and mitigating their disadvantages. But the turning point for this season was looking in the mirror and saying, hey, here's the things that were wrong last year. Whether it was the distractions provided by all the off the field stuff with their coordinators getting in trouble. I mean, both their coordinators got DUIs in the span of 6 months. Eliminating that distraction, moving on from both of those guys, helped them. Eliminating the distraction of a 2 quarterback system and giving the entire controls of the offense to Tommy Mellott, that's helped them. Brett Vigen and the way he was sort of an overseer that was not necessarily that involved in the game day in terms of pulling all the strings and directing traffic. That's totally different. He's completely involved now. Every single element you could have said was wrong with last year's team, they fixed it, and that's what's got into this year's team. And then you talk about the sort of intangible element of motivation. And that's where I think that's the gasoline on the fire is with the players, right? Those guys are the ones that have been training every day. I'm sure they have it on repeat in their head, that extra point getting blocked and what that felt like and just the heartbreak that came with that. So It's a great question, and I think that their ability to address the weaknesses, fix those weaknesses, but then also the intrinsic motivation that came with the disappointments of last year have all played big factors in them getting to this point.
Bobcats win again.
So, fifth quarter at the R Bar?
Dude, I could crush a burger right now. Can you guys pick it up? I'm thirsty back here. Guys, what's up? Hop on in. Fifth quarter's this way.
Oh, new R Bar merch.
Yo, what's the fifth quarter?
They have food, drinks, and giveaways after every home game.
And these sweet Bobcat cups.
Oh, I'm in.
Take me to the R Bar.
Join us at the Rocking R Bar after every home game for the fifth quarter.
Let's celebrate the spirit of blue and gold.
Yeah, you mentioned stability at the top, and I've said on your show that whether you're mid-major football, FCS group of 5, mid-major basketball, whenever you have a good program and there's job openings up in that general area, your coach is just going to be linked to that, whether he's an actual candidate or not. Like whenever there's an opening in the Pac-12 Mountain West, like Brent Vigen's name is going to be attached to it just because, he's a heck of a coach and he's continued to build a really good program. It seems like the most smoke out there as far as him, being in the discussion for another job was just this last weekend with Washington State. And obviously that has now gone to Jimmy Rogers, that opening, South Dakota State head coach, now going to Washington State, and Brent Vigen recently signing a contract extension. But what can you say just about Brent Vigen, Washington State, where that was at? And the rumor mill was spinning around pretty feverishly this last weekend.
No doubt. I think that, I've always said this from a reporting angle. I do think that the strength of your organization is directly reflected in the amount of leaks that are coming out of it. And while there was a lot of stuff in terms of the rumor mill, and there was a lot of third-party stuff in terms of Brent Vigen's involvement with New Mexico, Fresno State, as well as Washington State, there was really no direct links or leaks from internally. The only leak I got was that Vigen did have a team meeting that he addressed the team. But basically what he said was, I know my name's out there. I know you guys are hearing it. I know you have Twitter. I know you're on the internet, all that stuff. If I go somewhere, you guys will be the first to know. And that was it. And so then I think that shows you, first of all, the respect he has in the walls, as well as the sort of stability of the organization. And then you talk about, I think that Vigen, on a personal level, I know he loves Bozeman. I know he really, really wants to raise his family there if that is the opportunity that's provided. And now with this new 4-year contract extension, that's certainly right there. I mean, his youngest son, I think, is probably 12, 13 years old probably. So, 2029 will get him almost to graduating high school, I guess. I think that's important to their family. But who knows? I mean, if a Power 5 comes in and offers him in a year or two and they can buy out that contract, we'll see. I just think that Vigen was not going to leave for an opportunity. People always say, well, how do you turn down $1.5 to $2.5 million a year? How do you turn down a 10-year or a 5-year, $10 million contract like Jason Eck got or whatever the numbers are with all these contracts? And I think that it's more than that to Vigen, because first of all, the way that they're doing it at Montana State with the contract that he just signed, the way that they're able to fortify that with monies that are raised privately and from the collective and the endowments and all that sort of thing, they're making it worth his while to stay there. But also I think he understands that, you go to New Mexico and you have great success. Okay, sure, it vaults you, but who has done that, right? I mean, Rocky Long is the only one that had any sort of even kind of sustained success there at New Mexico. And it's the same thing at Washington State. I mean, Mike Leach, Mike Price, those guys had a little bit of success. But then there's also like Paul Wolf, who went there and after that all went awry, he spent 15 years picking up the pieces and trying to get back on the horse to be a head coach again. So I think Vigen has that perspective. In terms of the effect on this upcoming game, though, I think it's a huge boost for Montana State. I think that it gives Montana State some major juice just because they know that Vigen is not only staying, but that there's an element of him choosing to stay and that he wants to be there. And I think that's a huge factor just in terms of engendering the team with confidence.
Yeah. Do you think Tommy Mellott is the most recognizable name in face in the state right now?
Definitely.
I mean, it seems like he's on the verge of legendary status, and like he's got to be like the most well-known figure for being whatever 22, 23-year-old young man. Like he's probably the most recognizable name in the state right now, right?
For sure. And so many things go into that. Spectacular athlete, no question about it. The fact that he's from Butte, Montana, I think plays heavily. For those that are listening to this that aren't familiar with Butte, Butte is one of the more historic towns in the West. I mean, at one point, Butte, America, as they used to call it, was the largest city west of the Mississippi. This is back at the turn of the century, in the 1800s, when the Copper King struck a vein there in the mining city. All of a sudden, Butte had like 175,000 people in it, and this is back when there was nobody living out west. So that history, but also the pride of being from there, has really resonated around Montana, around this region. Like I always like to say, Butte tells its story better than anybody. Like if you go to the sports bars in Butte, many of them have like little homages to all the great athletes that have come out of there. And it's just a cool, old school, working class type of town. Like I compare it to like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, where people just, they work hard, they play hard, they love sports. And so Tommy being from there puts him on this elevated pedestal. But then the fact that he's been so consistent, he's been so eager to be engaged with fans and the public and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the kid signs autographs for an hour after every single event that he goes to and every single game and all that sort of stuff. So that's been the most impressive part to me, is his ability to handle that spotlight. But you mentioned just in terms of what he means to the state. You know, Dave Dickinson at the University of Montana is deified. I mean, he is truly like God status amongst Grizz faithful. And that's resonated around the Big Sky Conference too. Like when the Big Sky celebrated its 50th anniversary and they did their top 50 athletes of all time, Dave Dickinson was number one. Tommy Mellott and Dave Dickinson are a very different style of quarterbacks. You can't compare the numbers whatsoever. I mean, Dickinson threw for like 12,000 yards, 120 touchdowns, and like 14 picks or something crazy. Tommy Mellott doesn't, he's throwing for half that many yards because he's a running quarterback in a spread option system. But in terms of what they mean to the respective universities, I would say that the only comparable person to Dave Dickinson has been Tommy Mellott at Montana State during the modern era. He's not quite there yet, but if he gets them over the top and they win a national championship, I mean, people still talk about Super Dave here 32 years later after he won that national championship, and I guess 29 years later after they won it in 95. Tommy Mellott wins it on January 6th, and he deserves to be at least in that conversation just in terms of what he's meant to the university and the state as a whole. And I think that's what makes it such a cool story.
Are you paying too much in taxes? Elevated Tax and Accounting is a firm that specializes in tax planning and strategy to minimize your tax bill. Elevated Tax consult with you on tax strategy throughout the year, so no more waiting until the end of the year and hoping for the best. As a business owner, you know your sole focus should be spent working on your business, not in it. Outsourcing gives you the time to concentrate on the core reasons you started your company, to create and innovate a top-tier product and generate profits. Elevated Tax and Accounting, elevating you and your business with a modern professional touch.
Yeah, how have you seen this year's defense kind of rise up to a level where you can see, okay, this looks like, a defense that can help Montana State to a national championship, where in the years past, you didn't always feel that was the case. And like this, like I don't know if they have a guy like Ty Okada, at the safety position, even though I think Ort is solid, and I actually really like Polidor as well. I think he splashes more watching him than he does on the stat sheet. But Ty Okada was super, super gifted. They don't have a linebacker like Troy Anderson, which that's fair. Like, no, there's not gonna be a linebacker like that again, probably. I don't know if they have a guy like Daniel Hardy. Greavy is just as disruptive, but just from a pure talent standpoint, it doesn't seem like they have those heavy hitters. Yet as a unit, this looks like the best Montana State defense in many, many years. So is that a unit thing? Is that a scheme thing? How have they been able to raise their level of play on that side of the ball?
Well, I think Bobby Daly, the first-year defensive coordinator, has certainly mastered the scheme. It's the they call it the Bison Bible, right? It's the old school NDSU scheme that they've been working on forever, and architects like Gus Bradley and Scotty Hazelton, and Freddie Banks was the one that brought it to Montana State, and Willie Matt Garza, and now Bobby Daly. And I think each coordinator puts their own spin on it. They have their own nuances to it. But I think, first of all, Daly's done a tremendous job calling it. But in terms of the reason they've been so solid is I think more than anything goes down to depth. Montana State lost who, in my opinion, is their two most important defensive players. Not their two best, but their two most important earlier this year. That's Blake Schmidt, who's their starting nose tackle. And he's the most important, one of the most important, just because there's just not guys like, I mean, you know how hard it is to find the Eli Mosterts of the world. You know, like if you have that dominant guy on the interior defensive line, that makes everything else go, even if that guy only ends up with 19 tackles or whatever they end up getting. And then Danny Ulukepa, he's the heart and soul of their defense. He's the captain. He's supposed to be the best linebacker in the Big Sky. Him going down against Idaho really hurt him. But they haven't missed a beat. I mean, Paul Brott stepped in for Blake Schmidt, and he's a second-team All-League guy in the Big Sky Conference his first year as a starter. Bryce Grebe, who's Birdie Grebe's little brother, and Neil Daly, a couple more Montana guys, they've stepped up for Danny Ulukepa, and that's really helped solidify that position. And they've gotten to the point now where, like South Dakota State, for example, they can roll 8 or 10 guys on the defensive front, and those guys have kept getting better. And same thing at linebacker. They rotate 4 guys at those 2 inside linebacker spots, and those guys have really upped their level of play. And now they've really solidified the back end too, and I think the fact they have 3 really good corners that can play in Simeon Woodard, Andrew Powdrell, and John Johnson, and 2 of those guys being seniors, I think that helps as well. But more than anything, I think they have great continuity, and the stats aren't flashy because the Cats, the first like 10 or 11 games of the year, the starting defense didn't play into the third or fourth quarter except for one time. So all the guys, if you're looking at their stats, like sure, Birdie Grebe only has 7.5 sacks this year. Well, he was sitting on the bench for the last quarter and a half of basically the first 10 or 11 games of the year for the Cats. And also, they had these multiple games where they just didn't even play any snaps. Like against Utah Tech, they forced 8 straight 3-and-outs. So by the time you get to the fourth quarter, you've only played 24 plays. There's not a lot of tackles to go around by the time you only played 24 plays in 3 quarters of football. So all of that, though, I think points to the fact that they've had great stability on that side of the ball, awesome depth, and I think Bobby Daly's done a heck of a job in his first year as the coordinator.
Yeah, and getting to this matchup now with North Dakota State, what would you say is the biggest cause for confidence for Montana State, and what would be the biggest cause for concern going up against the Bison?
Well, I thought Tim Polasek nailed this yesterday during the press conference, because everybody's going to talk about this quarterback matchup with the 2 best guys in the country that aren't named Mark Gronowski going at it with Cam Miller and Tommy Mellott. And Polasek said, hey, I know there's all sorts of elements in this game and so many things are going to play, but he's like, when I look at this, you got 2 great offensive lines, you got 2 great defensive lines. You got 2 stud freshman running backs who are going to play huge roles for each one of their teams. They got Taco Dowler, we got Bryce Lance. You know, they have great stability on defense with veteran leadership. We got great stability on defense with veteran leadership. Their kicker kicks it out of the back of the end zone every time. Our special teams unit is awesome. So you sort of score it out. Okay, you can find an edge for this side or this side back and forth. Really, what's it going to come down to? Which quarterback plays better? Like that's what it's going to come down to. And what a fitting moment for both of these guys. Like Cam Miller was sort of pinned as this game manager who, you know, doesn't have the first round draft pick type talent like a Carson Wentz or a Trey Lance. And, you know, he's a departure from the guys that came before him. And can he do it? How good can he get? And now he's gotten to the point where he's so good that I think he's an NFL guy. I think he's had an awesome year during his senior year there at NDSU. And with Tommy Mellott, it's always been threefold. Can he stay healthy? Can he learn how to throw the ball? And can he settle in to being the man? Well, all 3 of those have been answered resoundingly this year. And I think it's fitting for him too, because I think this game is going to come down to, can he make the throws that North Dakota State is going to not let him make, but the stuff in the game plan that NDSU maybe gives up a little bit, that's going to all come down to Tommy Mellott's execution. So I think it's a pretty cool deal for both these guys. Both these guys are going to have a real opportunity to really put their skills on display and also go out with a huge impact on the result of this game one way or the other.
Join Town Pump's Pump It Up Rewards Plus program and never pay full price for fuel again.
Save 5 cents on every gallon every day at any Town Pump across Montana.
Plus, earn and redeem points on your favorite in-store items to get free stuff with our clubs.
Stop in and pick up a rewards card. Download the Pump It Up Rewards Plus app today.
Or visit townpump.com/rewards to register and start saving.
Town
Yeah, on a podcast of ours, our preview version of this podcast, I was trying to quantify how much Brent Vigen staying slash deciding to stay, however you want to phrase it, like how do you quantify that for this game? Because it does seem like it's going to give Montana State like some sort of boost, just like a energization there. I want to ask you the same thing about how most, if not really all of Montana State's best players are Montana natives and seniors. Like how do you quantify that in a game like this? Because it's not like NDSU is going to be lacking motivation or anything like that. But on the other sideline, like to have you put into words greatly like how much it means for Montana natives to play for the Grizz or to play for the Bobcats. A lot of these guys are seniors now, so like how do you quantify what that means for a lot of these guys in this matchup?
Yeah, I'm so interested to see how it plays on a neutral field, in Frisco, because there's going to be a ton of fans for both sides of this thing there. I think that exact factor though played unbelievably huge roles in Montana State beating Montana this year. And I think that's one of the main factors in the game every year on either side. Like which side has the seniors that have, the most to add to their legacy within the scope of that rivalry. And I think it helped the Cats during this playoff run at home, particularly last week or a couple weeks ago against South Dakota, because those guys knew like that's a rare thing to get that finality where this is the last time you're ever going to play at Bobcat Stadium. This is the last time you're ever going to play at the Fargo Dome. It doesn't matter if we win or lose. Like this is it. So let's go out and perform our best. I think that played huge there too. I don't know how much it actually does translate. I think it does play just in terms of wanting to win for the university. But make no mistake, North Dakota State has a bunch of guys that maybe aren't even from North Dakota that want to win for the university and want to win for the football program and want to win for the standard that Tim Polasek has talked about, endlessly this year. So I think the Montana pride thing has been the number one driving factor to get them to this point. Now I think it just comes down to you got to go out and perform. But I think that's what's so cool about this game. We've seen this, Sam, over the years, especially with Big Sky teams that have gotten there to Frisco. One of the biggest questions is always, can they handle the stage? They're playing North Dakota State. North Dakota State lives in Frisco during the month of January. Like these guys know the drill. They know the atmosphere, the venue. They know all of the different ins and outs of all of this. Can the Big Sky team stand on that stage and compete? That's the thing about this game. I don't think either of these sides the moment's not going to be too big for either of them. I think they both are going to be welcome and ready to stand on the stage. So then it comes down to who performs the best. And I think that's where I'm sure we're going to get into this, but the coaching, I think, is going to play a huge factor in this game.
Yeah, I do think you can tell in some previous games which teams were ready to go and which teams were a little, shell shocked at the stage. One of my favorite stories was back in 2015, January 2016, when NDSU played Jacksonville State. They have the team entrances and all that, and NDSU runs out, as a team, everyone together. When Jacksonville State runs out, like it was kind of scattered a little bit, like a lot of guys running out. Then there were some guys kind of behind and another group behind them. And it turns out Jacksonville State players, some of them missed their entrance because they were talking crap to NDSU players. And then so they just weren't mentally ready to go. And then, the Bison kind of jumped on them really early. So I do think, being ready for this stage is a key factor. But like you said, I don't think it's, I think both squads will be ready to go in this when they are so veteran. So last question for you now. Montana State is a favorite, about 3.5 last I saw. Yesterday I published my annual anonymous coaches from around the FCS predict who they think is going to win. 14 coaches predicted Montana State to win. 4 coaches predicted NDSU to win. Seems like just from the vibe I'm getting, a lot of people media-wise will be picking Montana State to win. And so do you get a sense that there's a high level of confidence in Bozeman? Maybe not even like the football team, but just like the biggest followers of Montana State that is there a level of confidence that, okay, this is our year now, like this is the time for us to rise to the top? Or is there still a little bit of, well, it is NDSU in Frisco. Like, is there confidence? Is there some nervousness? What sense do you get from the Montana State followers?
Man, I think so much of that is age dependent. I think that a lot of Bobcat fans that are younger than us, a lot of people that are in their early 30s or 20s or whatever, I think they have a ton of confidence because what they've known over the last 10 or 15 years is, 6 Big Sky titles over the last 15 years, playoff appearances every single year, Final Fours 4 out of the last 5 years. Like that's the standard. That's what it's been at Montana State. Bobcat fans that were aware enough to know what was going on when the streak was happening, when Montana State lost 16 times in a row to Montana, they still have a complex. And I know some will listen to this and say, no, we don't. But most would say, yeah, we do. and I think that they're still trying to weave beyond that. That's what's been so profound about this team, though, is they have risen above that before the fan base and the collective following actually has. So I think that there's a lot of confidence because this Bobcat team has just been so utterly dominant throughout this year. But I also think there's a little bit of trepidation because it is Goliath, right? You got to go slay the team that's won 9 national championships since 2011. And, even go to 2010, that first year when the NDSU started making their rise, they won in Bozeman, and that knocked off the first of Rob Ash's Big Sky Conference teams. And that was sort of a harbinger of things to come, both for the FCS and Montana State and their sort of repeated losses to NDSU. But I do think there's a fair amount of collective confidence around the fan base, but I think there's also a little bit of trepidation just on, can they actually do it? Can they actually knock off NDSU? But I think that the Vegas line is just right. I think that Montana State deserves to be about 3.5 to 4.5 point favorites just on paper. But I also think that if Cam Miller plays out of his mind and North Dakota State finds the magic and they figure out a way to win one of the places, whether it's the line of scrimmage or the turnover battle or whatever it might be, NDSU has a great chance too. So I think this is going to be an awesome football game.
I think so as well. It should be fabulous. And we haven't really had a good FCS championship game as far as competitive wise since the spring season. If you want to go to the fall seasons, probably 2019. Since then, 21, 22, 23 have all been rather decisive games. So I think we are in store for a battle in this one. So should be fun. Colter, I will see you down there. And as always, I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Maybe breaking news out of Brookings. They're saying Dan Jackson maybe going to be the next head coach at South Dakota State. That could be interesting. This coaching carousel is crazy, right? I wonder what would have happened if Jason Eck waited 5 more days before he took the New Mexico job. Like, does he end up at Washington State? And then what dominoes happen after that? Because then, then Jimmy Rogers is not at Washington State. Then Dan Jackson doesn't have this decision to make. I know Jackson was in the mix at Idaho, and if he's going back to South Dakota State, that could be interesting as well. So the coaching carousel, fascinating. Anyways, see you in Frisco, man, and thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you again, Colter, and thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll catch you guys on the Flippity Flip.